So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Adam Simon. I'm a professor of Earth and Environmental Sciences at the University of Michigan and a member of Voices for Carbon Neutrality, a broad coalition of faculty, alumni, and students launched in April 2018 to serve as a catalyst and accelerator to drive the University of Michigan to carbon neutrality with urgency. We welcome you to our webinar today focused on emerging financing options to deliver carbon neutrality. But before we get to the main topic today, I want to take a moment to thank those of you who have served our country and protected our freedoms. Today and every day, I am grateful for your sacrifices. I am proud to be the grandson of a naval officer who fought in the Pacific Theater and helped the world prevail over tyranny during World War II. My grandfather was an immigrant who came to this country seeking to better himself and his family, and proudly served the United States of America during one of the most epic struggles in our global history. We thank all of you, the men and women in uniform, for your courage. Our collective fight today is helping the world prevail over the devastating impacts of anthropogenic climate change. There is absolute agreement that climate change is and will continue to negatively impact our global community, with the most negative impacts affecting communities of color and the economically disadvantaged who lack the financial resources to make the changes necessary to adapt to a changing climate. The University of Michigan considers itself leaders in BEST, and it is time for our university to ideate and implement solutions to save the world from anthropogenic climate change. This is our epic struggle today. One of the major considerations the University of Michigan must make as it considers various pathways to carbon neutrality is the cost of building new energy infrastructure and how to finance our energy transition. Over the past few years, many universities, both public and private, have engaged with experts in the private sector to develop creative solutions that provide financing for major energy projects. Importantly, this is no different than current models used by the University of Michigan to use private financing via bonds for all capital projects. It's something we already know how to do very well. Today, we are fortunate to have a panel of experts who will share with us their knowledge of demonstrated financing solutions that will allow the University of Michigan to achieve carbon neutrality with urgency. I'd like to welcome Kevin Self, a proud University of Michigan alumnus who will moderate today's panel. Welcome, Kevin.
Adam, thanks very much, and I echo your comments to those that served. My father-in-law also was actually part of the Normandy invasion so many years ago, so thanks to all of you. To Adam's point, my name's Kevin Self. I'll be your moderator today. I lead strategy and government affairs for Schneider Electric, a company with actually very deep roots from the University of Michigan. I'm also a two-time Michigan graduate and one of the founding members of VCN, the Voices for Carbon Neutrality. To Adam's point, today's webinar is going to focus on financial options for carbon neutrality. Realizing there's many needs these days, especially with COVID, for financial assistance, what we've brought together is a panel of experts who are engaged with this new world of private financing for these type of opportunities. So joining me on the panel today are Juan Macias of AlphaStruxure, Larry Davis of MAP, Andrew Marino of Generate Capital, and Robert Johnson of Hannon Armstrong. And so first I'd ask the panelists to introduce themselves. And Juan, why don't you go first?
Thank you, Kevin. Hello, everyone. My name is Juan Macias. I am the CEO of AlphaStruxure, a company that we created a little over a year and a half ago between Schneider Electric and the Carlyle Group. The purpose of the company is to design, build, own, and operate behind-the-meter energy solutions for the industrial, municipal, different market segments. So, pleasure to be with you here today.
Very good. Larry.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Larry Davis. I am currently the Senior Advisor and Chief Scientist of MAP Energy LLC, a Palo Alto, California / Oklahoma City-based energy investment firm. We have been involved in the renewable space being involved in about 400 different properties at various stage of creation over the past 15 years. And I formerly held the position of president and managing director, but as my hair may suggest, I've moved into a emeritus status.
Thank you, Larry. Andrew.
Thanks, Kevin. I'm Andrew Marino. I'm the head of strategy and the senior managing director at Generate Capital. Generate Capital is a business that was built 6 years ago to provide sustainable infrastructure and energy as a service. We deliver decentralized sustainable infrastructure off of about a $2.5 billion balance sheet, where we own assets for somewhere between 15 and 30 years, and we provide those services to our customers. We generally operate in about 3 segments: power, waste to value, which is largely anaerobic digesters and renewable natural gas, and transportation. I'm pleased to be here, and prior to this, I actually had the great privilege and pleasure of helping Juan Macias set up AlphaStruxure as a part of the Carlyle group. So excited to be here with you.
And for those of you that may have been at the April 5th, 2018 Voices for Carbon Neutrality event at the Michigan Union, Andrew was on the panel, and at that point, we at Schneider had not yet set up AlphaStruxure. A year later, we did have it running, and I'm sure Juan will talk about that momentarily. And so lastly, I'd like to introduce Robert Johnson from Hannon Armstrong. Robert?
Thanks, Kevin, and salute to the veterans as well. My father was in World War II as a sergeant in the Army, so salute to all the veterans out there. My name is Robert Johnson. I'm Senior Vice President at Hannon Armstrong. We are a 40-year-old company that is solely dedicated to investing in climate change solutions. We're a publicly traded company on the New York Stock Exchange. We went public back in 2013, and since then have raised over $1 billion of new equity capital. We also have approximately $6 billion of assets under management and about $2 billion on our balance sheet. We originate nearly $1.2 billion annually at this point. We do so in 3 segments. One is behind the meter. You've heard that term here a couple of times, and we'll explain that further. Some notable projects that I will probably talk about today will be the University of Iowa concession agreement that we participated on with Engie as well as Meridium. Second area is the grid-connected world, where we invest in solar land and on-site wind. And third is sustainable infrastructure, which is water, storm remediation, i.e. MS4 type of projects across the nation. So that's who we are, and that's who I am. I look forward to the discussion.
Very good, Robert. Thanks, and thanks to all my panelists. And so maybe I think you hit on it, Robert, but I think it would be intriguing to maybe first talk about the University of Iowa announcement. I think it's one of the more recent announcements, and specifically from a Big Ten university. So could you provide a little bit more perspective on that partnership?
Sure, and I'll also point out that Ohio State did one a few years ago. So there have been 2 here in the Big Ten, which my alma mater is going through a process to University of Maryland. So Iowa is an interesting one in that it has a couple of pieces of the puzzle. If you think about these concession agreements, they're not one that defines a project up front, but rather will be a series of projects that will happen over time. In other words, upgrade projects like the central plant, for example, or any energy conservation measures that might happen in the buildings themselves. Rather, it's a transaction that provides an upfront check to the university for the right of the provider, whoever that is. In this case, it was Engie and Meridium, and we were one of the equity providers there, to then manage these systems on campus over a 50-year period from an operations and maintenance standpoint, a capital upgrade perspective. So it is a rather comprehensive project. It even included, if you think about energy, and I know the discussion here, Kevin, is around the zero carbon and getting to carbon neutrality. But surprisingly enough, water has a pretty significant amount of embedded carbon, especially around marshlands, much like my background here. So in the case of Iowa, it also included storm remediation and MS4 type of projects within it. So it was not only a carbon mitigation strategy, it was also a resiliency strategy to the effect that there's a river running through the University of Iowa, and mitigating floods and the like was something that they wanted to take care of. So that's in a nutshell what it was. It was a very comprehensive project across multiple pieces. And one of the things I want to point out from a carbon neutrality standpoint is, in their case, they still had one coal-fired boiler on campus. And one of the key performance indicators that was originally arrived at on the project was to replace that boiler no later than the year 2025. So there's a project that wasn't defined up front. In other words, we don't know exactly how much it's going to cost or all the attributes around the project, but we do know that there is a goal to put that project in place by 2025. Similar KPIs or key performance indicators were put into place in the University of or Ohio State University project, and I'll describe one of them there that's a little bit juxtaposed in that the in-building demand side energy efficiency, and this is a big part of where you want to get to a low carbon footprint. There, they were looking for a 25% reduction in the carbon intensity of those buildings over the first 10 years of the contract. So in each case, you can look at it from a lens through which you're looking at either the demand, how much I'm using of energy, or even the supply, how I'm supplying the energy to the campus, and also ancillary pieces of the puzzle, like I mentioned with water, that become part of the total carbon makeup of the campus. And those comprehensive thought processes are actually very insightful and helpful to getting to the answer.
Very good. Thanks, Robert. Any of the other panelists have examples to share with the audience?
I've got one, Kevin. It's not with a Big Ten school, but it is with a maybe another customer that is not quite as financially savvy or well endowed, and I think it might be instructive. Generate recently was actually in the middle of a project for one of the largest public school districts in the country, Hillsborough County Schools in Florida. About 200,000 students, 2.7 million square feet of buildings. And what we're doing is we created a broad project to reduce energy usage and carbon usage across the entire school network. We've invested about $120 million in LED lighting and advanced IoT-based energy management and high-efficiency heating and cooling. And we are planning on investing a lot more to get Hillsborough County to a net zero energy profile. Some of the things that have happened there, just that we're incredibly proud of. First of all, the school system is paying nothing up front. Number two, we are working with them, so it is actually a transaction that is accretive to their overall credit profile. So it actually increases their ability to borrow through our participation. We are able to do so in the context of all of the labor requirements. A lot of this happened in COVID, so we were able to work very closely with the local regulatory officials and teachers to keep everybody safe. And also, really importantly, we estimate that we reduce annual CO2 emissions by 55,000 tons across the school. Our work continues with them. It's the type of community involvement that we pride ourselves in doing, providing really a win-win to help communities that don't have a lot of financial margin take the right steps towards a more climate-friendly future.
In Andrew or any of the panelists, I mean, you sort of get to the point of, how, be it universities or public school systems or municipalities, those steps they have to take to get to the point where they feel comfortable in sort of handing off the ownership of these properties. Any learnings from conversations, successes or failures that you've had?
I think one of the learnings is in a municipality case. You really have to work with the municipality to evolve the way they contract, right? And a parallel to Andrew's example in a municipality, across the country, we also see a number of municipalities migrating their fleet infrastructures, right? Whether it's school bus fleets, whether it is municipal bus fleets, and also you have also police vehicle fleets and other vehicle fleets. So as we make commitments to move to decarbonize completely those fleets and move from gas vehicles to electric vehicles, we're also working on a number of projects where we not only facilitate the design and the transition of a gas fleet to an electric fleet, helping the municipality design an end-to-end solution from how they're going to run the new electrical buses, the charging infrastructure, the electrical energy infrastructure. And when you look at fleets in terms of the hundreds to the thousands of vehicles, this is a pretty significant undertaking. And so there's some important elements in this that you're able to achieve the total transition and evolution of the operation of such a system, and with a capital solution with no capital upfront by the municipality, you're also able to accelerate the migration of such types of projects. And I think with city councils and municipalities having an open mind and being quite proactive in how they evolve contracting, you can achieve a great deal of acceleration in meeting these commitments that we're collectively making, and the impact that speed can bring.
Very good.
I also think, Kevin, and we've talked about this a lot, and we may have even brought this up at the last panel. There's a big difference between taking the financial risk of ownership and controlling the use of the assets. And I think that there is, working with an institution like the University of Michigan, there's no reason for somebody like us to control the facilities. In fact, it's almost ludicrous to really think about it. But I think that we'd all agree that the mission for University of Michigan is to provide education. And maybe it's not, you've got our energy is part of it, but it's almost a non-core ancillary cost of doing business. By the way, Walmart thinks the same way, not about education, but energy is sort of ancillary to what it does. And so while they have to have strict controls of what happens, they really don't want to own the risk and have to manage the assets. What they want to do is be able to turn on the lights, have them come on, want to be more efficient. They want to have cost savings, and they want to be able to wring somebody's neck when it doesn't happen the right way. And they want an aligned partner. And so I think that's just a distinction that I'd like to throw out there, because that's, I think, what all of us on this panel hope to provide. And it's really the only way that we can bring about change within communities, is to continue to give the communities autonomy to make their own decisions.
Thank you, Andrew. Larry, anything to add?
Sure. I think it's important that when we think about these projects, we think a little bit out of the box, and we explore all different types of alternatives in terms of reaching our ultimate goal, to be carbon neutral. And I find it interesting. I happen to be located in the state of Oklahoma. I'd honestly much rather still be living in Ann Arbor, but I am here. And I find it interesting that in sort of the heartland of both conservative thought and the oil and gas industry, that the University of Oklahoma and Oklahoma State University are respectively 100% and 70% renewable electricity generated. And it's interesting to look at how, for example, the University of Oklahoma created a partnership that enables itself to be 100% renewable. So what it did is it forged a partnership with Oklahoma Gas and Electricity, our local utility here. And in this deal, the utility built a wind farm that was enough wind power, generate enough wind power to offset all of OU's electrical use. And in this case, it could be essentially the exact same megawatts going from the wind farm because we're close enough, it's located close enough to the university. And the way they financed this $270 million project is that the state of OG&E actually was allowed by the State Regulatory Commission to put this in to the rate base for the state, because we're essentially displacing coal. We were traditionally Wyoming coal, so we clearly are causing a net positive effect. Hard. And in turn, the university agreed to buy the RECs, renewable energy credits, generated by the wind project from OG&E, and then OG&E agreed to distribute those RECs to the ratepayers in the state of Oklahoma. So really what we've done is created a project that combines the state, the utility, and the university, and in my mind, everybody is a winner. Now, one thing that, and I don't want to monopolize or speak too long, but the one thing I do want to say is one of the reasons that this works so well in Oklahoma is that Oklahoma is an incredible resource for wind energy. Therefore, the cost to generate wind energy in Oklahoma is economically very advantageous. So the things we have to think about as we strive to bring the University of Michigan to a carbon neutrality is just not think that we need to think how we can get the most economically efficient results and displace the maximum number of greenhouse gases for the same dollar. And I probably can talk about that a little later in our discussion, some ideas.
Very good. Thanks, Larry. And let me remind the audience that if you do have questions, there is a Q&A function that you can pose, and we'll try to work through those. Maybe a question just broadly to the group. And so we've talked about a couple of examples, but I mean, what are you seeing in terms of change, maybe due to COVID, maybe it started before COVID, of more public entities looking at these type of options to move forward with their own energy plans?
I guess I'll chime in there a little bit, Kevin. One is COVID has pushed some things to the right. I don't see any projects getting outright killed at this point. What I do see is some things being pushed to the right. And over time, that's acceptable because, like Michigan is probably experiencing today, the students are going back to school, but then they may not be. So there's a whole series of administrative issues that the college universities are dealing with today that were unknown 9 months ago. So this is perfectly acceptable and something that we could rationalize as all of us. The other thing that it's creating, however, is a pressure point. Andrew brought it up before with regard to credit. And in the case of, I'll go back to Ohio State for a second, when they wrote the $1.1 billion concession check, it actually became a credit positive for the university. So all else equal, they created more liquidity. So they had a $1.1 billion check coming to them. And Moody's also upgraded their credit rating. So they got pretty much a double positive there in that scenario. I think that's one of the reasons why some of the universities are looking at these alternate structures and saying, well, can this apply to me, and how can I use this as a vehicle to get to the goals that I'm looking for? At the end of the day, you have to keep the goals in mind. But how can I use these types of alternate vehicles outside of my traditional bonds and other financing that I've done for years, use these to my benefit as a campus over a long period of time? And they can include, in the case of both Iowa and the University of Ohio State, they can include things like affinity programs, for example, where the students are part of the whole process. In other words, they intern at the organization who's doing the work, and the organization has a commitment to hire the people, the students, once they graduate. And there's a living learning lab that is created as a result of this. And it's very beneficial for all the parties involved.
Yeah, Robert, I don't know if you were looking at the questions, but that's actually the first question that just came through with someone who was posing is right. Obviously, there's the financial benefits, but what about the benefits from a living learning laboratory? I'll just give one perspective from myself, from a Schneider Electric perspective. As we're looking to recruit, students and our employees of the future, to be able to recruit them from a campus that's actively working on the projects and the solutions that we need assistance with working on is a huge plus. Anyone else have any commentary?
There's some very nice examples on the Schneider side of the house, Kevin, right? I mean, at Ryerson University, we have a greater than 5-year relationship in terms of a living lab, not only from the design and operation of microgrids, but also from buildings and a building automation and energy efficiency focused on not only new inventory of buildings and how do you design and optimize, but also looking at existing inventory of buildings and what are the approaches in order to, in a cost optimized basis, really improve the efficiency and energy consumption and electrification of buildings.
Yeah. Anyone else have any commentary on that?
I think look, we're all in this business because we have a point of view on wanting to have impact on climate. And so I would probably speak for all of us that when we have the opportunity, we'd love to create an opportunity for folks to learn the trade around energy and climate. It's something where we need more education and more focus, and it's that level of awareness is really required, and it can happen at all levels. When I mentioned Hillsborough, one of the things they asked us to do is to they wanted to control the programs, but we invested in setting up a learning center also for high school students. Not as grand as some of these other things, but at all levels, it's super important.
Yeah.
And Kevin, I'll add one more perspective to this, and it may be something that's stretching the envelope just a bit. But in most of the living learning labs, they've been around the engineering piece. In other words, how do we engineer the systems? How do we best manage the systems over time? But there's also a part of the projects that goes to governance. So in other words, as you set these large projects up, there is a governance process that is worked on by all parties, including the university. Having some of these students participate in the governance process, although it's not engineering and it may not be carbon, gives them a really good understanding of how business works and how the processes work to come and arrive at decisions between various disparate parties that may be very beneficial for all parties involved. And I think that would be a really interesting learning experience for the students. Great perspective, Robert. And one other thing, I want to go back just for a second, Kevin, to the OU example, to the Oklahoma example. I think that is a really, really good example of how you could use renewables to achieve the goals. There are two things that one may want to consider in addition to that. One would be the resiliency of the campus itself. So in other words, wind energy in and of itself through the local utilities and providing black start or grid disconnected types of resiliency that may be demanded by the university, and Michigan may be one that demands that. So it doesn't address that issue necessarily. And the other issue it doesn't address necessarily is the campus energy use intensity. So if I just get off-site wind power in this case, have I really reduced any of the energy on campus? And one of the things that we were taught long ago was to first address the campus load and then design the campus supply systems to match that load. So I would say that although that's a great example and one that you want to put into place, it is, in my mind, also coupled with these other items around resiliency and campus energy intensity.
No, that's very good, Robert. Let me get to this next question, but first make a comment, a bit of a plug for energy efficiency. So obviously, I think people sort of jump to the supply side first without thinking of the demand side. What's sexy about a megawatt, right? I think as we Schneider advocate for the new Biden administration, that's going to be a huge focus, is ensuring that you get your demand side optimized before you start on the supply side. So let me ask one of the questions here, and I don't know, Juan, if it might come back to maybe some of the work that you're doing with JFK, but the question is, have you seen universities, school districts, companies, communities, cities, etc., just slid on me, go out and advocate for change in state or local laws to allow for those entities to go outside the regulated utilities? Often these utilities can be roadblocks in terms of allowing entities to go out and make changes. So any learnings, Juan, from the coalition that worked on JFK?
Well, I don't know, maybe not JFK, but this summer has been summer and fall very active in California, right? And the whole constituency led by California Energy Commission, really looking to address the specific roadblocks to a wider deployment of distributed energy systems. Whether it is the interconnection agreements, what can be done in order to improve the access to interconnect agreements, improve the speed and the clarity of what the requirements are, issues around destination load charges that can negatively impact the economics of behind-the-meter energy systems. So I think that the California Energy Commission is being very proactive, taking a view of all the different perspectives and the needs of the state in addressing this. And so I think that's a really good example. All the deliberations are available online. So there's a lot of good material on that website as far as how the different constituencies are getting really a voice at the table. And the regulator is taking a very active engagement of the community, and decisions are getting made. So I'm pretty hopeful there.
Good. Here's a question which sort of hits right at a point: is why shouldn't universities create their own organization or departments in replacement of what's being offered by the people on this call, and simply cut out the middleman and do it themselves? Who would like to take that?
Kevin, that's really the ultimate question here, because I would argue that the university, in the case of Michigan, already has that department, and it's called the physical plant department, running things, and they're probably doing a really, really good job today. So the real question would be, am I better off outsourcing or better off insourcing? That's really what the question comes down to. And two examples I've been using with Iowa and Ohio State are cases where they decided that outsourcing was the better way to go. And to some degree, it gets into a lot of philosophical discussions within the university and what they would potentially benefit from outsourcing. So in other words, the university may have some great people, some very good processes in place, but if there was an operator who had 50 systems underneath their belt, then that operator has the ability to apply the knowledge and experience, processes, and even people to the problems at one university. Instead of just being at one, it's applying 50 to 1. So it's a rather interesting debate that will go on, and one that would have to be decided upon within the university. I will say that over the course of the decision process with the P3, the public-private partnership and concession agreements, there is a notion called value for money. So in other words, over the 50 years, am I spending more or am I spending less by outsourcing it? And the decision process generally leads to I'm spending less with an outsourced type of a product. Now, obviously, time will tell whether that's actually the case or not, but at least that's the premise going into the projects.
And I think, Robert, just building on what you said, I mean, it's one very important dimension is, am I spending less, right? And then what are the outcomes and what guarantees I have in achieving those outcomes, whether it's resilience, whether it's reliability, whether it's the level of carbon impact that we're bringing to bear. And I think you can look at a variety of these KPIs and see what are the investments being made to achieve those across the board. What are the guarantees and commitments that are in place to ensure that we achieve those, and you can get a pretty holistic picture in terms of the comparison of that make-buy.
And Juan, you bring up a great point, and that is all around the risk shifting. So who assumes what risk over the course of these projects, and how are they enumerated for not making those outcomes, and what risk is being shifted? So it's a very important part of the discussion.
I echo what Robert and Juan are talking about. I don't think you can underestimate both the learning curve and the economies of scale. When you have a company out there that's been involved in 50 projects, they've learned how to do things in the most economically efficient manner. And, if you're going to do it in-house, you're going to have to replicate all of the functions that a company dedicated to that does, and yet they can spread those costs over a large number of clients and projects. So I'm not sure if you do it in-house, it doesn't become more expensive.
And an example of that, Larry, is so our audience can get a conceptualization of an important element is when a plant is designed today, right, by us or anyone, you're going to have the control, automation, and operation of this, completely digitized, right? So what an operator like us then does is, we have a very modern network operating center where we connect to all of these sites, and we're getting all the data in. We're 24/7, 365 monitoring everything, and we have the analytics in place in order to optimize operation and optimize cost across all these platforms. So there is a significant benefit to being able to operate multiple sites.
So I think Robert had made the comment early on when you may have been talking about the University of Iowa, specifically about key performance indicators. And just once again, it'd be interesting to hear from all of you as you've dealt with, various opportunities that you've ever succeeded with or not succeeded with. What are some of those key performance indicators that you would highlight to the audience as the university gives thought to how potentially to go down a path like this?
Well, I guess I'll start it, and then everybody can fill in. One of the key performance indicators that a lot of universities and other customers, like Andrew pointed out, K-12 schools, for example, is used is energy savings. So energy savings can, in and of itself, be a key performance indicator. But what you'll find is that you get more comprehensive with these projects, the key performance indicators will also expand. So think about things we just talked about with regard to outsourcing and performance standards around availability of the system and how much uptime the system would have versus how many hours there are in a year, 8760, by the way. And there might be a number of these. I mentioned energy intensity in the buildings on Ohio State. I mentioned KPIs related to changing out coal-fired plants, for example. So what you have to do as a university is think about those things that are most important to you. So in one of the projects that we did with the university, there were 13 KPIs, for example, and they spanned across water, energy intensity, and the like. So between the operator, the financier, in our case, and the university, we determined that those 13, and unfortunately we didn't pick 12 or 14, I guess it was a lucky number to some degree, but those 13 became the key performance indicators that created the foundation for what was the risk sharing between the parties. And I would urge, in the case of Michigan, to think about what are the most important aspects of the project you want to accomplish and write those down, collaborate, I guess I'll call it, within the university. Make sure that you're all in agreement with that, and then make sure that the outside parties who would be involved in this were also in agreement with it.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a question right now, which maybe you had seen, Robert. It says, once again, in partnership like Ohio State's with Angie, where the partners are working on energy efficiency, who ultimately dictates the project, right? Is it the university? Is it the external capital firm? And I think I would argue that I think the answer is developed, pre-agreement. It's one of the things you're really negotiating and say, how do we want to run this, and what do we want the partnership to be? Because we want the outside entities to provide the best thinking, but they're not going to necessarily control. There will be governance set up to ensure that it's a collaborative piece of work. Is that true?
That's true, and that's a very important part of any of these projects, is having that collaboration and governance process already embedded, not only in the contract, because the contract are words on paper, but it's as important to have the people make sure that they understand what the outcomes we're trying to seek, and all parties are at the table. So when a new project comes up, let's say Ohio State wants to build a new combined heat power plant, for example, that isn't just a decision that NG is going to make on its own. It's going to be one that's going to be made alongside the university in terms of what it's going to accomplish, what the size of the plant will be, all the different attributes of it, timing, how it's going to be financed. So this is a collaborative process, even though it is governance at the end of the day, Kevin.
Anyone have something?
I was just going to also add that it's not a university, but the private sector, many private companies such as Google or Microsoft, companies that have big server centers and everything, are also investing highly in the renewable space. And they are doing it, in my opinion, but also through their statements, for two factors. One is for reliability. That's the key metric for them. If you're running a service center, you have to have the electricity on. And the most important criteria to them is the lowest long-term cost of energy. So, and I have to say that my focus is on electricity, but in all of these cases, because they're new buildings they're building, the energy efficiency, which is one of the other key components that's been mentioned here, can be built in to it. But really, reliability, and cost are really primary factors.
Kevin, as Larry was talking, I was thinking just for a second, and the University of Michigan, for example, is in an environment that's not isolated. There is a community around the University of Michigan, for example. I might argue that there might be a governance process that would include the community. It might include, I know you're going to have other panels on this about social justice and environmental justice. So there's multiple ways to take this governance process and thought and really make it more than what it would be otherwise just for the project. So I'll throw that out there as maybe a challenge to the University of Michigan to think about it more holistically.
Good. Another question: If Michigan were to enter into a long-term energy management service contract with a third-party provider, how can it contractually ensure the provider continuously improves and meets competitive benchmarks as the state-of-the-art advances, and other competitive third-party providers improve their offerings? Right. It's that question is, when do I buy that new vehicle, new what have you? Right. You want all the benefits going forward, but you don't want it to be the old version. Any comments?
Well, I've got a comment. I think that this is what a lot of people struggle with, making sure that they're absolutely on the very, bleeding edge of the efficiency frontier. And I will say, from my experience, that will last for about 30 seconds. And so I would offer two bits of advice. First, generally on a philosophical term, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, because even if you're doing something good and it's not there are always going to be debates about what's optimal. But everything that's incremental is incrementally good for the planet and much better than where you are today. So that's step one, is that you insist on quality, but you'll never be able to get perfection because it really it's a constantly evolving space. The other piece of advice I would give is to think about, I think the governance piece is incredibly important, and spend some time thinking about how to be holistic. And then proceed in stages to learn a little bit. Find some folks who are aligned, and then figure out how to do maybe one building or or start to get a program in place where you can bring in folks that give you a sense on how first to do building management and automation. So really focusing on the demand side and then start to focus on the supply side. But do things incremental so there can be learning and comfort before, jumping in with, both feet and both hands.
Very good. Another question, do any further examples of university/community collaborations? I mean, we've talked about Ohio State, obviously, University of Iowa. Any other in your work?
I don't have any examples directly of that in the university space, Kevin, but having previously managed JCI's federal business globally, I can say that from a military perspective, there are what are emerging as we call public-private partnerships, or P4, not to one out P3, but it is bringing in the community, because the community at the end of the day is very, very intertwined into what's going on at the military base. And everything from the personnel to things as simple as trash pickup, for example, become intertwined. And how do we optimize this ecosystem, if you will, from the military base versus the outside party? That's why I brought it up, because I've seen it starting to emerge in military bases, and I can see the same dynamic potentially playing out for a university case and its surrounding communities, because they all, at the end of the day, become intertwined. People are working together, they all live together, and the businesses become intertwined with the university. So it becomes a very much a holistic viewpoint.
Yeah, actually, a specific Schneider Electric story on that is we put a microgrid into the Miramar Air Force Base down in San Diego a number of years ago, and in September of this year, when they were having their wildfires, they were actually able to take the power from the microgrid and power about 2,000 homes in the near area, because San Diego Gas and Electric was having rolling brownouts and blackouts. Look, and I know that Adam, I want to give Adam a couple minutes at the very end. So with 4 panelists, I would ask, the 4 of you, if you could also just, very briefly answer for the university, as they do continue on this path forward, what words of advice would you provide based on the paths that the 4 of you have walked?
I would start off by saying it's really important to consider all perspectives. For example, the University of Michigan, the state of Michigan, is not many times the most efficient place to generate renewable energy. There are better places in the country. So be open to the idea that the end game is to be carbon neutral. I know at one time a lot of institutions were talking about paying a carbon tax, RECs, buying RECs, that type of thing. Well, there are opportunities out there that the universities can, in my company, we have a number of universities, including the University of Michigan, that invest in our energy portfolios that create renewable energy, which subtracts greenhouse gases from the global planet, but at the same time, they get an economic return because they're an investor. So you are actually accomplishing both getting rid of greenhouse gases, which means you may have to supply your university with the most efficient local sources, which may be, in Michigan's case, could be potentially in the future offshore wind, the Great Lakes, or it may be modern combined cycle gas turbine plants, whatever, because those you want to also mitigate as much as you can. Our whole purpose, at least from my perspective right now, is to continue to eliminate the fleet of 1950, 1960 vintage carbon coal plants, right? We do the most bang for the buck. And, but just so think out of the box. To become carbon neutral, consider the perspective that you don't actually have to do it by having those exact megawatts coming into the university from a project that's located somewhere in rural Washtenaw County.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Larry. Next. Closing statements.
I guess I would just add that, I agree that on two things that have been said. First of all, University of Michigan should understand its place in sort of the geographically in order to generate energy, and I would also echo the fact that some options of generation may not be available or may not be obvious to the University of Michigan, that and so it's not a bad thing, frankly, to invest in renewable power, as Larry describes. There are also other areas where there might be other technologies like fuel cells or other things that will incrementally reduce carbon. So a mix and match of different aspects, depending on the individual circumstances, are really important. And again, can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. The second thing is that I can't overstate how important it is for universities to be communities. The ability for a university to not only show the way in terms of climate, generally philosophically, but then also put its money where its mouth is in terms of energy efficiency, energy reduction, and the right types of supply mechanisms. But then thirdly, to be in situations of energy distress, to be able to shown to be magnanimous and actually supply power into the outlying communities, which is available. Those systems are available. Kevin and Juan, you guys make them. Think about all those options, because that creates, far be it for me to tell the University of Michigan what the University of Michigan brand is, but to be able to do that really shows leadership, intellectual, cultural leadership in an area where we need institutions to step up and take that mantle.
Thank you, Andrew. Robert or Juan?
Sure, I've got a couple of thoughts here as we close up, Kevin. One is, in terms of carbon or net zero carbon, be open to the idea that it's not eliminating carbon necessarily. There's a large medical center, as I understand, at the University of Michigan, and they need heating and cooling. So the best way to accomplish that might be through a natural gas combined heat and power system, for example. That way you provide resiliency, but it's not eliminating carbon. So I would challenge the thought process of the balance between carbon neutrality or carbon elimination versus resiliency over time and adaptation to the climate. So that you're thinking holistically about what the university's mission is, not just in the context of carbon, but also in the context of what its mission is and how it's producing that mission over time with the various constituent organizations within the university or within the community for that matter. I'd also offer that, many times we're talking about a lot of things. We haven't really talked too much about funding. So how do you fund and finance these projects? And I will say that in the world today, there is capital. Private capital waiting and ready to go invest in projects like this with counterparties like the University of Michigan. And it can be capital that is very efficient in a lot of cases, but it is not your traditional method of simply floating a bond and doing a project. So I would also challenge the folks to think about things out of the box from a, how do I structure and finance this? And is private capital the best way for me to go? I can't answer that at this point. What I can do is just simply lay the foundation for the thought process that says we need to at least consider these other alternatives outside of what we've done in the past. And that's what Iowa and Ohio State have done as well. The other fundamental piece is be open to new ideas and collaborate with private entities. So you have 4 of us here from private entities. We're certainly willing to help in this process, but there are many more that will be you'll have on your team, advisors, for example, and the like. reach out to industry, reach out to people, get their perspectives, and build that into what you think is the best possible solution for the university. I can't emphasize enough this collaboration that it produces much better outcomes from my experience over time, both with universities and with the federal government. So by all means, do those three things, and I think you'll come out with a fairly interesting set of outcomes.
Thanks, Robert. Juan, anything to say before?
I think just the closing thought for me is the potential of that collaboration can fundamentally bring speed to addressing some of the challenges that we have and objectives that we have around sustainability, around resilience, around modernizing infrastructure. Bringing those elements together can deliver speed.
Very good. Thank you, Juan. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Larry. I'll turn it over to Adam to close us out.
Yeah, I'll just make a couple of quick comments here and then share a few slides with the audience. One is to pick up on some of the comments here, especially those that Andrew made, and we're talking about incremental change. You know, the University of Michigan consumes enough power annually by way of electricity that we need about a 2,000-acre solar farm. And that would replace all the electricity that we currently consume on campus. We could keep the natural gas plant on campus as a non-spinning reserve. So Robert touched on the fact that certainly the hospital, when we're undergoing surgery, we want to make sure that the power stays on. So we could keep the natural gas plant as that non-spinning reserve that would instantaneously provide maximum electricity for the hospital should there be a failure with the solar panels that we could build in Washtenaw County. So one of the things I'd like to encourage all the participants who are listening to the webinar to do is make sure that you really fact check your intuitive theories about renewable energy. You hear a lot of people talking about, well, Michigan is dark in the winter, well, Michigan is cold. But if you actually do the math, there is plenty of land space available within Washtenaw County, which is where the University of Michigan's Ann Arbor campus is, and around our sister campuses in Dearborn and Flint, where we could build solar infrastructure and battery, and we could power all of the electricity we consume over the entire year. So, you know, I think that just wanted to make that one final comment, and then just to share with the audience who are watching here, if I can do this properly, you know, just a few asks for the University of Michigan. So one of the things that we would like the University of Michigan to do is to engage with outside experts who have demonstrated experience planning, financing, and implementing major energy infrastructure change. To my knowledge, I've investigated faculty across our entire university. None of the 4 panelists work at the University of Michigan.
We can only see the top bar of
okay. Let me
PowerPoint.
Let me try this again. Is this better?
Much better.
Okay.
Perfect.
So back to number 1 here. You know, we need to engage with people outside the university because speaking as somebody who is you know, still in school at 48, we don't do this. And I think it's silly to have an ego that indicates we think we can do this on our own. To some of the comments earlier, we don't make our own food. We don't clean our own bathrooms. We outsource all of that. And so just as we outsource to Sodexo to make sure that all of our students are fed in the dining halls, because it would be silly for President Schlissel to announce that we're going to create a new campus farm and grow all of our own food. Nobody's going to do that. So by the same token, we should consider outsourcing our energy. The second is act with urgency. And we recommend that the university kick off a plan by buying carbon credits right now that offset all campus emissions and put in place a firm timeline to eliminate the credits with major infrastructure change. Not 2030, 2040, 2050, but buy carbon credits in 2021 and put into place a plan that we're carbon neutral by 2024, 2025. That's reasonable to plan for. And third, to some of the comments here, work actively with the city of Ann Arbor, the state of Michigan, and God help us, President-elect Biden, who actually mentioned in a positive light both science and climate, to reduce emissions for a better, more just, and equitable world. The city of Ann Arbor, approximately half of the homes in the city of Ann Arbor are occupied by students and staff at the University of Michigan. So we are one community, and we should behave and we should act as one community. And for the people at the University of Michigan who are watching now. You know, here's what we ask you to do. Please take your time and reach out and communicate to President Schlissel and your elected Board of Regents and request that the University of Michigan move towards carbon neutrality with urgency. This is their job. We need to hold them accountable. This is what we, the people, want our elected leaders to do. Communicate to the full President's Commission on Carbon Neutrality that their final report must include immediate and feasible plans to put the University of Michigan on a path to carbon neutrality. And lastly, follow Voices for Carbon Neutrality. We are a group consisting of alumni, students, staff, and faculty who are pushing the University of Michigan to make the changes that we, the people, want them to make. So if you work at the university, or you're an alum, or you're a student and you want to become involved, please check us out. I've listed our website here, 3 different places, or email me, Adam Simon, University of Michigan. You can find me on the web pretty quickly. And then last, I'll just advertise on the right side of the slide here. We have a second webinar next week, November 19th at 11 a.m. Eastern, that will focus on the connections between carbon neutrality and climate and environmental justice. The panel next week will feature Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist, Sam Stolper, a faculty member in the School for Environment and Sustainability, a PhD student, Ember McCoy, in the School for Environment and Sustainability, and an alumnus of our University of Michigan, Jason Towe, who is a recent graduate of Harvard University's Master of Public Health program and now an elected member of the Board of Overseers. And with that, I would like to thank our 4 panelists and Kevin for moderating today. We really appreciate each of you taking your time to work with us today. And I'm sure each of you would love to get a phone call from President Mark Schlissel and say, Juan, Robert, Larry, Andrew, how do I do it? Show me the way. And I pray that, Mark, you make that phone call as soon as possible. That's my plea. So thank you all very much, and we appreciate all the participants who watched the panel. Thank you, and have a great rest of your Wednesday.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks.